one's not on. Is it on now? Oh yes, that's much better. Okay, let me jump up on the stage. He says with his knee giving way. Look, good evening and a very big welcome to everyone who's come along tonight, as well as those to watching online. It's great to have you all along to hear what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion on sport and climate change. My name is Richard Hedding and I'm the Treasurer of Lighter Footprints. So look, I'll just take a few minutes to introduce the evening and take you through tonight's program. Julian, could you just move to the agenda, please? Next slide. Thank you very much. Firstly, on behalf of Lighter Footprints, let me acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people as the traditional owners and original custodians of this land. We pay our respect to their elders past and present. And look, I'd also like to acknowledge the Lighter Footprints Committee for their hard work in putting this event on. So thank you very much. Note the event will be live streamed on YouTube and recorded, so you will be able to find the recordings on the Lighter Footprints website and the YouTube site. So look, we're fortunate to have a fantastic panel to participate in a roundtable discussion covering sport and climate change. All the panel are leaders in raising awareness of the impact of climate change on sport and inspiring and encouraging people to take action. Nicola Barr is a St Kilda AFLW player and decarbonising sport lead with FrontRunners. Tom Campbell, AFL, is currently playing for Melbourne and is co-founder of Footy for Climate. Alexi Lynch is now the CEO of Footy for Climate. He co-founded the Environmental Jobs Network, managed the ICLEI Oceania's Cities for Climate Protection campaign, and has led strategic projects for ironbark sustainability. And Lizzie Hedding is the co-founder of Project Planet, Build a Ballot and Tilt Studio, and a recently retired elite long jumper. And Lizzie will be the moderator tonight. And full disclosure, Lizzie is my elder daughter, in case you hadn't figured that out. So to the agenda of the night, we'll start with a brief introduction from each of the panellists to give an insight into their journey to becoming involved. We'll then move on to a roundtable discussion covering the impact of climate change on sport and what roles athletes and clubs can play in the fight against climate change. About 8:30, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, so get your best question ready. Want one from, well, we can't have one from everyone, but we can have one from most of you. And we'll bring some microphones around so your questions can be heard. And then about 8:35, we'll provide thanks, a few remarks on the next activities planned by Lighter Footprints before wrapping up at 9 p.m. So that's all from me. I'll now hand over to Lizzie to take us away. And if you'd like to come up and grab your seats, that'd be great.
Figure out a stand. There you go. Oh, that's not nice. I might. Yeah. I'll just pass it back to you. Hi everyone. As mentioned, I'm Richard's daughter. My name's Lizzie. It's really exciting to be here tonight. I am the co-founder of Project Planet and Build a Ballot, which you might have used during this year's federal election. And up until April this year, I was also an elite long jumper, which I think makes me relatively qualified to host tonight's panel of fantastic guests and conversations about sport and climate. I'll let each of our panellists introduce themselves in a second. But I thought I'd kick us off with a little bit of context before we jump into it. I think, you know, in general, a lot of athletes, when they start to talk about issues like climate, often get told to sort of stay in their lane. So I'm excited tonight to get out of those lanes in a way that I guess would otherwise lead to disqualification, but we are safe tonight to discuss these issues. I think we're all in this room very aware of the impacts of climate change more broadly, but to put it in the context of sport, I've dug up a few statistics for you, helpfully from the FrontRunners Instagram page, so thank you for that. In the last 5 years, 540 local AFL clubs have been impacted by climate-related events. So that's bushfires, floods, bushfires and floods. in one that might concern some of us here tonight, Australia's ski seasons are predicted to drop to just 37 days by 2080 from about 88 days now. So you're looking at just over a month of time to get up to the snow. Last summer, 20% of BBL games were weather affected. And recently at the World Athletics Championships that are currently being held in Japan, the marathon and the race walk events had to be moved around. So climate change is impacting sport both at a local and elite level all around the world. But at the same time, athlete-led campaigns here and around the world are, helping put pressure on decision makers and increase public support for climate action, as well as taking steps within clubs and communities to actually reduce emissions and be a real part of those solutions. I'm very excited to hear more about each of the things that our fantastic guests today are working on through their respective organisations. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass across, and we'll just go along. Oh, you can take this one. Introduce yourself.
Thanks, Lizzie. Very well qualified to be moderating the panel. And Lizzie said thanks to FrontRunners for all the statistics, but Lizzie does all of our beautiful socials, so it's actually thanking her as well. My name's Nicola. I am playing for St Kilda Football Club. It's my first year there after spending 9 years at the Giants in Sydney. So moved down to Melbourne. My family's from this area originally, so I feel like I've come home. And we had a great win on the weekend, so I'm in a much better mood than I was the week before. Thank God. But yeah, I guess growing up, always played lots of sport, lived overseas for a long time, and sport was always my way to, meet people, make new friends, feel a sense of belonging wherever I lived, because I did move around a lot as a young kid. And so sport was always that thing for me that was really stable. So always played sport, but didn't move to Australia until I was 14. So it was never AFL until much later in life. I always played a lot of soccer, a lot of basketball, netball, you name it. I wanted to do it. Loved getting out there and challenging myself, and loved just being outside in nature all the time with my family. So whilst I probably didn't think about that a lot, I think having spent so much time in nature, it was always something, the climate was always something that was really important to me. And then fast forward until, I think it was 2021, I was playing AFLW with the Giants, and the Black Summer bushfires happened. And I remember walking out to a training session in Greater Western Sydney. The sky was orange, there was ash falling down from the sky. And I just to be honest, I was really nervous about going outside to train. I was inhaling smoke with all my teammates, and I was kind of chatting to a few of them going, this feels a bit odd. I'm not really sure if we should be going out to training here. And we were running laps and just couldn't breathe very well. And then the next session we ended up cancelling. We moved inside to train instead. And a lot of the discussions with my teammates were, oh wow, if this is impacting us as professional athletes with all of the resources and ability to adapt our training with the medical staff around to support us if we aren't safe, what do the impacts of climate change mean for young kids wanting to play sport? It was such a big part of my life. Like I said, it's where I made friends, where I built skills, where I learned to be a little bit more resilient. And it was just so much fun. And it was the worst when sport was called off on the weekend. Bad for me, probably worse for my parents, because I was then going to be just annoying at home. So, yeah, I guess that's when I started really thinking about how climate was impacting sport and what I could maybe do as an athlete. And that's when an email landed in my inbox from yours truly over here, Tom, and Jasper Pittard, who played for North Melbourne, and Tom at the time, and they started Footy for Climate, and sent out an email to all AFL and AFLW players kind of talking about what they were doing. And I just knew instantly I wanted to get involved. I'd always cared a lot about climate and nature, and wasn't really sure what I could do as an athlete. So as soon as the email landed in my inbox, I was like, yep, get me involved. I want to be a part of that. And since then, my medical science degree has gone down the drain, and I'm just working in sustainability instead, and absolutely love it. I think sport has a huge platform for positive change here in Australia and around the world, and really proud to be doing what we're doing at Footy for Climate. And I've just realised I actually didn't say anything about FrontRunners, which is where I work, but maybe we can circle back to that.
I'll try this one. Hi everyone, I'm Tom Campbell. As Nick said, I'm the co-founder of Footy for Climate, and yeah, I've got my own sort of journey through sort of being a kid, being concerned about climate change. Yeah, it's sort of a little bit different to Nick's journey. I think I was a serious little kid. I loved my sport, but sort of the earliest sort of climate memory that I sort of have is sort of watching this show, Captain Planet, when I was a little kid. It was sort of like the best kind of climate propaganda, but sort of like struck sort of this sort of like, yeah, this real sense of needing to protect the environment. And so I sort of carried that as a little bloke, and then as I was sort of growing up, my parents would keep little projects, assignments we did at school, the good ones. There's much more of my sisters than there are of mine, but there's a few of mine that got through, and there's this one, we had a prompt to sort of talk about Earth, and that was it. It was very broad, and I sort of did this whole thing about, I don't want to live on a polluted planet, and we should do things like plastic bag taxes. And so, sort of 12-year-old Tom was pretty serious. But I had this experience of like not really doing much after that. Like I sort of had this sense of like, climate change is this big issue, the environment's getting broken down, that's really bad. And then, became a footy player and was living my life. And it wasn't really until, the same sort of period of time Nick's talking about the Black Summer bushfires, and, that's really seeing the images around our country of, communities being devastated that, sparked a conversation with me and my teammates at North Melbourne, particularly when our training was forced indoors. It wasn't much of an impact on us compared to, having a whole community wiped away, but we did sort of think about, what can we do with our platform? We're elite players. We do have a public profile, some of us more than others, but collectively we can actually draw attention and hopefully provide some support to these communities. So that was really the starting point of Footy for Climate, and then over the last 5 years with amazing leaders like Nick and other players around the men's and women's competitions, sort of built this organisation. We had some ideas at the start around just being a bit of a committee and sort of asking the AFL to strive for more ambition. We were doing our own flight offsetting projects, and at that stage I was late 20s bloke, so I made a podcast, of course. And we made a short film and other cool things, but over time we've sort of stepped up the ambition and the degree of professionalism, and sitting next to me is proof of that in Lex. But now we're sort of much more focused on community support and how we can at the elite level give back to the grassroots where the impacts of climate change are really being felt. So Lex can sort of speak to more of those projects later on, but that's sort of been the sort of evolution of my sort of climate journey and the organisation to the point it is now.
Hi, my name's Lex. I'm the CEO of Footy for Climate. I'm the only non-athlete here. I know you can't tell, but I will talk about, I guess, from my perspective, the way that my two worlds have sort of collided, starting with footy, because that was the first one. And for me, I fell in love with footy in 1983 at Errol Street Primary School in North Melbourne. And like I'm sure so many people here have got very similar stories. There's nothing unique about this. In fact, there are about 10 or 11 million Australians who have a similar story. And it was just playing footy every day with my friends at primary school, 60 odd kids in grade prep. And what's important, I think, in I guess one version of this story is the kids that I was playing footy with in 1983 when I was 5 years old, Dan, Moke, Harriet, Nico, my brother, and 2 or 3 others, who I still go to the footy with today at 47 years old, because through that journey at primary school, we played footy every day. And then high school takes you in different directions, and I, like a lot of kids, had my footy dreams that never came to fruition, but still we'd catch up. Every Saturday, we'd go down to Arden Street at training to have a kick of the footy. Uni would come and we would move in different directions. Some got married early, some had kids, some travelled. But whenever we came back, we'd have footy and we'd go to the footy. And if we played in the state, we'd go to the pub and we'd watch the footy. And we kept that connection. And that connection is so powerful and has remained so powerful that now I'm going, and that clan that used to go to the North Games in the 80s and 90s has gone from 9 or 10 to about 30, because as well as being at the game still with Dan, Moke, Harriet, Nicole, it's our kids, it's our parents. And so it just grows and grows, and it has been absolutely a connection that I would not be here the person I am and having those networks and connections I still have if it wasn't for this amazing sport. I still played and still played old man AFL 7s, and so I still get out there a little bit. But I think when I realised that there was this organisation called Footy for Climate, I was like, you've got to be kidding. Like, this sounds like the most amazing organisation of all time, because I've worked in the climate space for about 20, 25 years, and for me it was sort of a little bit further back, studying things at uni and getting involved in climate advocacy and what local governments are doing, state and federal governments and climate organisations, and understanding the cultural power of sport and footy. And I'm so glad you touched on that at the start about staying in your lane, and sport and politics or sport and climate shouldn't mix, because they've always been together and they always have been inherently part of the broader social fabric of life. And so it's great that we've got athletes talking about climate change. When I realised that there were Tom, Jasper, Nick and other players that were talking about this is an organisation that I just was desperate to get involved in and could apply my understanding about how you can reduce emissions, how we have the solutions, and how we can make sure that the athletes involved feel like they're comfortable and able to talk about these important issues to them, which is basically, as you just heard, protecting their communities and protecting the future of the game that they love. Thank you.
Amazing. We can give him a clap. Picking up from what you've just said, and I might bounce this to Nick to force her to introduce the organisation for which she works. And actually it's kind of how I met all these people. Actually, I guess in a oh my gosh, Lizzie, personal stories time. I, similar to everyone, got very engaged in climate around the bushfires. And at the time also, considering myself an athlete, not quite at the level of some of these guys, signed a petition for FrontRunners. And then that was sort of the first step for me, funnily enough, thinking back to how I got involved in climate. It was one of the first things I did that sort of has laddered up to the work I do now. So I think in so many ways, we're all sort of this same story of sport being a really integral part of our journey into climate space. But what I wanted to ask was, I think we've sort of touched on briefly like the impact of sport in an advocacy context, the impact of athletes standing up and talking about climate change and how powerful that can be. And I guess I just wanted to start with you, Nick, to ask, what do you see as being the real impact of that? And are there things that have surprised you? I know for me, to sort of kick up what I'm getting at here, like, I think it's interesting hearing stories from, around politicians and in Canberra and things about just how much they care about sport relative to other things. And you were in Canberra last week, a couple of weeks ago, and I just was curious to hear, both the campaigns that FrontRunners has done and the work you're doing now, and how you really see that impact playing out.
Yeah, sure. So I'll really briefly introduce, as briefly as I can, FrontRunners, which is where I'm working as their project and engagement director at the moment. So FrontRunners is a very small organisation that was started by Emma and David Pocock. So David Pocock, I'm sure a lot of you know, is the current senator for the ACT, but before that was a player for the Wallabies and the captain, I'm pretty sure, at some point. So very, very, very successful sportsman, and he was probably the only player during his rugby career, or any athlete, I guess, at the time, who was really speaking up about different social and environmental issues. And when Dave retired, he and his partner Emma, who is amazing and supported Dave to do a lot of that advocacy work, a lot of players and athletes were reaching out to them saying, oh my God, I can see these black summer bushfires happening. Like, what can I do as an athlete? I'm not sure. I don't want to get my fans offside. I don't want to, do anything that's going to upset people. I don't really, can I say anything? I'm an athlete. I'm not a scientist. And because they had all of these questions and people were reaching out to them, they thought, we better start a little agency to support athletes to do this work, because we know how influential they can be, not just, from their own profile, but also just internally with their own teammates and their families. People look up to athletes as role models and really trust athletes. There is some research out there. I don't know what the statistic is, but athletes are one of the most trusted people in Australia. It's crazy. I think they come number 2 to doctors, which is nuts. I don't know why they trust us, but they do. And so
I think they put us in charge. Like, why not?
But they have an amazing and really important platform to be able to speak about different social and environmental issues. So that's where FrontRunners was born. And the campaign that Lizzie is talking about was the Cool Down, which was an open letter to the government at the time calling for more ambitious climate action. And they had, I think they were hoping to have like over 10 athletes sign that letter, and they had 460 athletes sign that open letter. So huge success. Yeah, it was amazing. I wasn't there at the time, but they did amazing work. And since then, FrontRunners has run several other campaigns. And from the cool down, we then got in touch with Tom and Jasper at in AFL, and also Pat Cummins at cricket, and players from other sports. So FrontRunners has really helped to support athletes who want to do more, who want to create organisations, who want to use their platform to speak up, who want to be able to go and talk to their sports organisation about what they're doing, whatever it is that an athlete wants to do when it comes to climate. That's why FrontRunners exists, is to support them to be able to do that work in a way that makes sense to them, makes sense to their fans, and is really impactful. And your question was about Parliament.
Well, I was going to say, like, with those campaigns, what have you seen sort of throughout your time as an athlete contributing to those and now working there as really being the impact sort of, I guess, like on the ground, whether that's in Parliament or within clubs or whatever it looks like?
Yeah, I think like a few of us have said already, politicians love sport. Everyone loves sport. It's what brings us together. And I think that sport creates a space where, you know, it's just a level playing field. Everyone feels safe there. We love sport, and it really brings us together. So I think when we're talking about campaigns like the Cool Down, that open letter to the government at the time, our politicians really listen to athletes and sports, and we know, and they know how influential sport is here in Australia. So what we see is that sport is a way in the door to be able to have those conversations. So, you know, a couple of weeks ago, Footy for Climate, Cricket for Climate, FrontRunners were all at Parliament in Canberra talking with Chris Bowen and asking the government to give us $100 million over 5 years to support local community clubs, put batteries in, put solar panels on the roofs, install more shade, get lights so that if it's too hot to play during the day, they can play at night time. And the only reason I think we were able to get in the door is because of sport, because we all come together through this love of sport. So I think the impact that sport can have when it comes to positive climate action is huge.
Everyone wants a photo with Pat Cummins, I guess. You got to leverage that. Did you have something you want to add?
No, I got a photo with Pat Cummins, though. It was awesome.
Yeah, nice. I remember Dave saying so sorry when he first started in Parliament, the number of like people from across Parliament House that just wanted a photo with Dave as the Wallabies captain, which I think is kind of emblematic of the fact that, you know, there's just this power because of people, like sporting heroes.
Just to speak to also the power of FrontRunners and what's been great about things like that open letter is that, you know, sometimes it can be really daunting as an athlete speaking out. Like if you're a part of a team and you've got something that you're really passionate about, like, you know, climate action, and your club doesn't have a position and no one's really talking about it. Oh, can I actually, you know, speak about this issue, you know, from my own perspective? What's it going to do to our club and our sponsors and all these sorts of things? And these were the things that were running through our heads when we were founding the organisation. And so it was really brave of Dave to take the leadership position that he did, especially, you know, part of the national team at that period of time. I think everyone in this room would remember the climate conversation of that sort of, you know, around the 2010 sort of period. And, you know, to have athletes from other codes, from around your own sport, that aren't necessarily your teammates, but are all uniting behind that message has been really powerful. So I think, to speak to the power of FrontRunners, you know, having that collective voice has been really awesome.
Actually, just as you were mentioning then, none of us are the youngest athletes out there. How have you felt that climate change being talked about in the context of sport has changed from those sort of 2010s period through to now? Have you noticed a shift, hopefully as a result of the work you've done, but more broadly? Yeah, so when I started Footy for Climate, I wasn't coming from a position of like, oh, I know heaps about this issue. It was coming from a position of concern. I want to learn some more about this. And sort of naively, I thought, oh, everyone's seen the Black Summer bushfires. This is the thing. This is why people care. And very, very quickly, I found like, oh, you know, this person's from like a coastal community and they've seen sort of erosion and this is their issue. And, you know, like, some of our First Nations players in connection to country, and there's like, oh, yeah, I've seen
those impacts, and that's why I care, the parents or whatever. And so, there was like a moment around those Black Summer bushfires. But, speaking to this, like the young players, they were far more informed than I was. Like, some of the, guys that I, know sort of in their early 20s, have been studying this at high school and have had, done subjects on that, whereas it just wasn't sort of in the curriculum for me. We weren't having that conversation. If I was sort of engaged with the news, maybe I was hearing that, but I wasn't as a 16-year-old. So I think it's been a really interesting shift in just our young people sort of being much more informed.
Yeah, and I think obviously athletes are thinking a lot more about it probably now, and there's a lot more discussion certainly amongst my teammates, but sports organisations are also starting to think about this a lot more as well. There is some pushback at times, obviously, and there are some really thorny issues like fossil fuel sponsorship, but sports clubs, I think, are now starting to see climate action as an opportunity to have an amazing brand presence, but also to reduce their own costs as well. It's more efficient, when they install solar or they put batteries or, they've got EV charging stations at their clubs. Like, I think there's been a real shift over the last few years on how sports organisations actually see this work. It's not just like we can't do it, we're already doing X, Y, Z. Like, they're actually really keen to do more of this work but also need support to do that as well. They're still learning, and I just think there's so much opportunity for them, and that's starting to be seen.
How much of the motivation for those things do you think comes from, the climate concern that all of us, and I presume most people in this room, feel, as opposed to things like costs? Like, do you find, and I was going to ask, Alexi, you guys are working on some of these projects, engaging with particularly like community clubs. Is it a matter of a bit of everything? Is there particular things that you find are driving forces in moves towards, renewable energy installations, things like that?
Yeah, I think it often depends on the club situation. But when we're talking about community clubs, I mean, as most people would probably know if you're involved or have been involved in a community club, it's volunteers, it's volunteer organisations, and there's a lot of priorities. You've got to make sure that the uniforms are ready and someone's looking after the tuck shop on the weekend, or the sausages, is it going to rain again? And so, plus energy bills are increasing. So it's, it can be challenging to say, can you also help save the planet?
Just a small ask.
Little thing. Which we're asking the athletes
and make
to do
sure
as
there's
well.
sunny boys in the freezer.
Yeah, exactly. So the way we're approaching that is, I guess, multi-pronged, and so it is bringing those things together. The fact that there are energy savings to be made by switching to renewables and putting solar and batteries on the footy clubs, or looking at single-use plastics or whatever it might be, depending on your club. To the point you made before, though, at the start, like that number, and it's quite interesting that number of 540 clubs that have required emergency assistance from the AFL just since 2020, from fires, floods, etc., climate-related events, it's now 595 just in the space of a year. And so those clubs know what's going on. There's a driver there. If you're at the Shepparton Swans, because you didn't have a facility for 2 years. Or if you're at areas in the west of Victoria where it's rock hard, you are aware that the risk of concussion is going to be a lot greater. For a club like Mansfield, where we launched a Power Forward project, so we've got a program called Power Forward at Footy for Climate, which is all about helping community clubs reduce emissions, be resilient to climate impacts, and save energy bills. We saw their bills go from $9,000 a year to $900 a year by putting 30 kilowatt solar and 40 kilowatt hour battery. They're wrapped. So this club are like, that's $8,000. That's like a sponsor. That's, I think, we'd had a great celebration with the club. They're just absolutely wrapped to be part of this program. They, talk about how that's like concussion screening for every player at the start of every year. So these is really tangible benefits that go a lot broader than just the environment and the greenhouse emissions side of things. So that's one. Working on projects like Pat Cummins and the Sport Forever program, which would be 1,000 sporting clubs across Australia. Our Power Forward, we want to do 500 of those clubs by 2030. And so we're now looking for the next couple of clubs that want to get involved, and then how we can ramp that up. And so we can make sporting clubs the hubs that they already are, climate hubs places where you can go, where you'll have the electricity running in the event of blackouts because you've got solar and battery, and places that can continue to exist and thrive even when you are having the challenging impacts of climate change. Because it is that tangible benefit, but there also is that intangible thing and the intangible challenge. If there is an event, you're not seeing each other on a Tuesday and a Thursday evening and then on a Saturday during, a game. And so that's what we want to help, and that's what we're starting to work on and we'll build over the next few years.
Yeah, amazing. It's interesting, I think, when I was sort of planning questions to ask and even thinking about when I first started getting involved in climate and thinking about climate and sport, it's easy to try to separate it into buckets. Okay, you've got elite athletes doing advocacy, Pat Cummins standing up and doing that. You've got, a grassroots angle here. But it's interesting the work you do, I think, really touches on so many of those things, and it all kind of fits together in a way that actually makes it more powerful because you've got those community clubs that has in-community benefits. You've got athletes connected with that and all those kind of things. Going to sort of go a little bit back to, I guess, the sort of elite athlete world, and maybe I'll throw this one to you, Tom. We've seen things like Woodside that sponsors Fremantle. Lynch used to sponsor the Australian cricket team. You or Nico wants to take this one. I just wanted to ask if you could talk us through sort of why these sponsorships are really important. Why do energy companies and fossil fuel companies want to sponsor sporting teams? And why is this something, you mentioned at the start being concerned about sponsors as a thing as an athlete, thinking about speaking about climate change. Maybe you could speak a little bit more to kind of what that means.
Yeah. Fossil fuel sponsorship in sport is probably the most challenging space for an athlete to speak about. And, we've grappled with it at Footy for Climate. How do we best communicate it ourselves? How do we speak to athletes who, fear this question? I think when we do this work, it is kind of like the logical space, like probably fossil fuel sponsorships and you fly everywhere. They're probably the two main areas. And, one of your questions, why do they want to sponsor sport? It's because sport is this amazing, clean community image of, health and wellness and, the best things that we strive for in society about, being competitive, striving to be your best and all of that sort of stuff. So, these are the images and the brands that, fossil fuels do want to align to, and it makes a lot of sense, right? They're trying to, they're purchasing social license by sponsoring our sporting organisations. I guess where it's challenging for athletes is when they don't align with the sponsors of their clubs, and there isn't really any say for our players. I don't think there is any player in the AFL that would have any ability to really directly influence the sponsorship of their clubs, but it doesn't mean that there aren't conversations that are happening in the background. So
maybe if you nick Dacos, you could.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, potentially. Maybe there's a small handful, but then we need to make sure that those players are motivated to do that. And so, when you look at the cricket example and Pat Cummins with Alinta, there is someone with the power and the platform to be able to actually influence, the ability of a fossil fuel sponsor to, support that team. So. It's a really complicated one. It's one that sort of causes athletes a lot of stress and angst. And I think it is a limiter to some athletes feeling like they are able to step into this space and speak about it. So, I think, Nick, with FrontRunners, you're probably, grappling with this one probably even more than, what Footy for Climate is and how we sort of communicate that. I think collective voice, collective action is more powerful. Feeling like you're that one athlete that's, calling someone out is hard. And also I think, some athletes are I don't want to call that sponsor out because what if there's a $3 million revenue hole that, is caused by me and that, puts people's jobs at risk. And so I think within that, we need to work on so many different ways in which we ensure that the sponsors of our sports align to the important community values that sport upholds.
Yeah, I think it's such a difficult issue, and players, not just in the AFL but across all codes, in our contracts, you can't bring your club or your organisation into disrepute. That's a huge part of our contracts. So you are really limited with what you can say, and I think it's really important that general public knows that as well. A player might really feel uncomfortable about a sponsor, but they're actually not allowed to say anything. So they're in really difficult positions. I think the other thing to say on this though is there's been a couple of more publicised examples of this, and probably the best one is not actually directly climate action. Danelle Wallam and Netball Australia, I'm sure lots of people saw that news in the media. She was in a really difficult position where she wasn't happy with the sponsor of the netball team, and went through a really, really challenging time and was sort of singled out really by the media, quite unfairly, I think, and was put in a really difficult position. I think it was, can't actually remember who took over the sponsorship. I think it was Victorian government, which was amazing. And they came in and kind of made sure that Netball Australia could continue, which was amazing. But I think the really important thing to remember about an example like that, and this would be the same for lots of other instances, is that the money that is coming from major emitters or big fossil fuel companies, the percentage of their revenue that they're putting towards sport is so small for them, but is so huge for sport. And I just think that's so important to remember, because the value that they get out of sponsoring sport is huge, but the money that they're actually putting into it is really small. So whilst it's really difficult, and I think, I can really appreciate how hard this issue is for sport, particularly as a female athlete. Like, we don't get paid that much. It's a lot better than what it used to be, but we really want to be paid to play sport. So we need money from these sponsors, but we also don't want to be sponsored by, companies that don't align with our values. So I think there's a real opportunity to educate and bring on the journey more climate-friendly businesses to get involved in sport and help them to understand the huge benefits that actually sponsoring sport can do for them. A lot of the time, like Tom said, huge fossil fuel companies want this clean image that's associated with sport because it does wonders for their brand. Why can't renewable energy companies have the same thing? There are lots of challenges with renewable energy in Australia, and I think there's a huge opportunity for these companies that are growing, and there'll be more and more of these companies as we transition. There's, I think, a massive opportunity for climate-friendly sponsors in sport. I hope that's answered your question.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting as well. It really highlights the role, as an entire sporting ecosystem, of fans as well within that. If you're thinking about, if you've got a team that's, announced a new sponsor, the athletes are in a pretty challenging position, but there are other ways to create pressure on that club. Is that something that any of you have seen, I guess, through your work in any particular campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, the one that comes to mind is probably Fremantle and Woodside. There's a really passionate group of fans that want to see that sponsorship dropped, and they've done a mountain of work, and I know that they are, like, I've seen pictures of them getting to games and supporting players and covering up the sponsor on their own kits of fan kits. And that is really helpful for players as well, can I just say. I think if you're a player that feels uncomfortable with your sponsor and you see these fans doing this, you can't say anything, but you can see that the fans are doing it, and it means a lot. And I think it does put pressure back on the club as well, right? Fans are such a huge part of sports organisations, whether it's AFL, rugby, netball, whatever. So that fan support is really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, quite empowering, I guess, to be even as a fan of sport, you have some agency in that. I think something you mentioned before around, as an athlete, and I was doing some pre-reading of various, interviews from all of you and things, and it's always the question that comes up in the context of sport. Oh, you're calling for more climate action, but you get flights to games every weekend. And I think it's something that all of us, we all live in the world. We have to eat food, buy things, travel places. So I think all of us grapple with this question as people, if we care about climate and we want to reduce our own kind of personal impact, how we find that tension between being sort of focused on a personal impact versus thinking about ways that we can take action that sort of intersects with the broader system and moves us as a system to where we need to go. And I just love all of you to kind of, I guess, reflect on that, both whether in your own experiences as well as through the work you do, how you think about that tension between kind of a more being laser focused on reducing carbon emissions, individual club emissions versus that sort of broader system shaping goal.
I can start from a non-sporting lens, and I think this is something that would be familiar to everyone anyway. And I think that over the journey, the fossil fuel industry and the major emitters have been extraordinarily successful at saying, you got to do something about it, and you got to do something about it. What's your carbon footprint? What's your carbon footprint? The carbon footprint was developed by BHP, I think, or BP? Exxon. Yeah, the whole point is basically to turn it back to the individual. So as well as having to, get a job that's well paid and look after your kids and put dinner on the table, you also have to deal with climate impacts and climate change. And of course you can and you should do those things, but my take, and this is even since well before being involved in Footy for Climate and working with community organisations or local governments, when people ask, what can I do, and I'm worried about the fact that I drove here or that I ate something that might have emissions, is to remind them that it's the system's change, and instead of being worried about your carbon footprint, be worried about your climate shadow, which is everything that you can do when you talk about things, when you lobby or when you advocate. Those are the sort of actions that can really make a big difference. And I think that's what a lot of the research sort of shows now at the moment, that of course there's an inherent hypocrisy in the things that we do all the time. We know we fly somewhere sometimes and we try and reduce emissions, but we've got systems in place that are the bigger, broader challenges, and so the things that we need to do to change those are always going to be collective, not individual actions. Therefore, talk, advocate, lobby, that's pretty much it. And make sure that then you've got a shadow behind you that is much bigger than that relatively small carbon footprint.
Yeah, I think from, it's one that definitely early on in Footy for Climate I was grappling with, like, I'm concerned about this. And like, oh no, like I've looked at everything I'm doing, my massive carbon footprint and flying everywhere and all of that. So, definitely have dealt with that. And then the conversations that I've had with other athletes, like there was sort of mentioned like the reasons why players would be concerned about climate change from their own personal life, but then there would be particular climate sustainability gripes within sport too. So like all through COVID, like a lot of meals were in like single-use plastics. We had this big sort of like single-use plastics group of players that were like, that's why I'm concerned. And so I think like early Footy for Climate was very much like, how do we solve every player's individual carbon footprint? That's the flight offsetting project. That's like trying to come up with different things that we could equip players with to start sustainability working groups at the club, to like practical solutions at those clubs. And I think where we've sort of evolved to is this sort of more like community focused, empowering the community, supporting the community with an action that is power forward and putting solar and batteries on, but accompanied by like really strong messaging about why that's important, why that's powerful, and why we can protect the future of footy through climate action. So I think that sort of maybe speaks to a little bit of that evolution over time of like being really concerned about sort of some of the micro like individual climate impacts, and then sort of realising that what we can build is something that is much more focused on the whole community.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough one. With athletes all the time, they get nervous about saying things because they fly or they're sponsored by this company or whatever. But the thing, and like, I mean, probably Tom has the same experience at his club. Within my team, like if I'm seen carrying a plastic water bottle, it's like the end of the world, because everyone knows that I'm working in climate, and Tom, you're probably the same, but like I'm not perfect.
I've got a little anecdote.
Yeah, so go for it.
A lot of footy clubs do fines. It's just like a little bit of banter, and like if you do anything that steps out of like the team values or whatever, you just get a little fine. And every time we did fines, I just had to come up and pay the carbon tax, just because I do this work. So anyway, that's just a little aside. I just thought it was funny.
No, but it's so true. And like, I think, I don't know if that's working, but I think what happens a lot of the time is people think that you've got to be perfect. Like athletes feel like they need to be perfect, and they can't speak up if they don't do everything well. And sports organisations would be the same. They're really worried about their own backyard before they speak up, which is really important, and we should all be doing everything we can. But one of the biggest challenges we have at FrontRunners is getting across to athletes that actually the best thing that they can do is have conversations with their teammates, have conversations with their fans, have conversations within their club, and use, you know, the profile that they have, even if it's 100 followers all the way up to Pat Cummins, you know, millions. Like, whatever platform athletes have, they're role models, and it is like those conversations that they can have about climate are the most important thing to be able to do, and getting them to understand they don't need to be perfect to be able to talk about that is really important, I think, because they can get stuck in, you know, like I've got teammates that come up to me and go, look, I'm using my Keep Cup, but they're like driving a Hilux, and I'm like, like, well done. Like, but again,
when
like,
people show you things because they're like, she'll be proud of me. You know, you're the girl that'll like give them a little pat on the back.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just getting them to understand that in sport, their power is in their platform.
Can I also just add one thing too there? There's this sort of, I guess it's a misnomer that, you know, people don't want to hear from sporting people and want them to stay in the lane and, you know, don't have that support. Whereas like we've done a fair bit of research with Monash Communications Hub, and there's lots of research out there, some that we're doing at the moment, that talks about, just kind of reminds you, I guess, that there's a very small number of people that actually don't want to hear players talking about issues that are important to them, and in particular climate change.
And a lot of them are employed by a few media companies.
So yeah, it's 16% of people in this big study said, no, we don't want to. That's not a silent majority, that's tiny, 16%. Most people are like, yeah, I want to hear from you. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons you're trusted, is because it is an authentic voice. You're just talking about your stories here. You're not preaching. This is my take and this is my experience. And the other one, just as a reminder, again, from the broader picture is, you know, over globally, there's a new project, it's called the 89% Project, which shows that time and time again, surveys show that 80 to 89% of any population anywhere want more climate action. And it is just that, as you say, very small minority that is overly amplified, and the ones that again are on the attack. But once we realise that we are in the massive majority here, and I guess once players start to know that too, and we at Footy for Climate can start to help them do that, it might become a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, so the work I do through Project Planet is not as specifically embedded in sport, but a lot of our sort of thinking came from my experiences in sport, which was, you know, during the referendum, I would say the only people that I had persuasive conversations with were people that I did athletics with. You know, I had a girl come up to me at training. She's like, oh, my whole family's thinking of voting no. We don't really understand what this is about. And we just like had a conversation on the side of the athletics track, changed her mind, changed her whole family's mind. And there's not many other areas in my life where I have, you know, people around me that are sort of, I have the close enough relationship with to have that conversation. And it's funny because even as someone, you know, I don't have a big public platform, you know, I have a little one, I guess, online, and I'm way more persuasive to Fran that I see every day at training than I am to, you know, the people on the internet that will scroll past my content. I think it's a really good reminder. Like, you know, I've been working on this project at the moment. We're talking about, you know, influencers. Everyone's talking about influencers. I'm sure you heard all the coverage during the election about influencers. And I sort of said to my co-founder the other day, I was like, I guess we're all influencers, aren't we? And that's because the people in our lives that we're most influential to are the ones that are closest to us. And sport is like a uniquely good way, I guess, to like get to know people that you can later influence.
Yeah, a small anecdote as well. Yesterday, my teammate Jessie Wardlaw, who just played 75 games of AFLW, she kicked 3 goals on the weekend. She texted me yesterday and I was like, oh, you were so good. I said to her, you were so good on the weekend, Jessie. That was awesome. And she just replied, she goes, oh my God, are you okay? I just saw the climate news. Like, she was talking about the climate risk report. And I was like, oh my God,
Bless.
I've done my job. You know, like, these are the teammates. Like, this is kind of the conversation that they can have with you because you've opened the door to have that conversation that they otherwise wouldn't have had. So absolutely, you can do whatever you want on the internet, but I think at the end of the day, we're all influencers because we talk to the people in our community.
Can she come to the retreat?
I'll ask.
Yeah, it's similar. Someone at a very well, I won't name a very well-known Australian track and field athlete came up to me at the National Championships after party, you know, 12 p.m. at the pub. She's like, Lizzie, like, I need to talk to you about like this very specific political issue. And she just knew that I was interested in this. And it's like interesting because I'm like, okay, well, I personally don't have the influence, but like someone that I know might. And it just like shows you the way that. And I think that's sort of for all the work you do, it's like a very good summary of how that works. You know, we might not be the most, sadly, no, Pat Cummins wasn't available to join us tonight. But, you know, through these community networks and through sport, sort of that ability to reach to a broader audience. You mentioned the National Climate Risk Assessment, which I was going to briefly mention. I'm sure many people saw it. Paints a very bleak picture of what the future of Australian, how climate is going to impact us. A couple of quite depressing takeaways: at 3 degrees of warming, we'll have around 4 times the amount of time spent in heat waves, leading up to 5 times the amount of deaths due to extreme heat, with 1.5 million more Australians at risk of coastal flooding, just to name a couple of the key takeaways from that report. It's obviously incredibly depressing reading, as most things in climate news are, to be honest. I will say the one positive thing recently is the battery installations. I'm just refreshing the numbers. That gives me hope. But in general, being involved in climate and being the person that your clubmates turn to talk about climate and to talk about things that they might be upset with. I had a friend recently asking me about, whether she should have a second kid because of the future of climate change. And I'm the person, that's me, the designated climate girl to talk to. How do you guys personally manage, just navigating this incredibly difficult news and the fact that you have, both your sporting role, you all appreciate in your sporting careers, like where you have influence, and also in your day-to-day jobs, the fact that you look at this. How do you kind of, get out of bed in the morning and keep doing this? Do you have a particular solution or take?
Yeah. So
could you fix it for us? Any advice?
getting the carbon tax every time we go to fines, I think sort of speaks to sort of like the awareness that my teammates have of the fact that this is something I'm passionate about and do a lot of work in, and that as for a certain group they're not engaged, but they sort of take the mickey out of it a bit, but you do get these incredible one-on-one conversations, and I think that's been really powerful and something I've really enjoyed. And it hasn't always been from players and people that I really expect. And sometimes it's coming from staff from around the organisation that just like, you sort of bump into them in the corridor and they're like, "Oh, Tom, I saw that thing you did. Like, I think that's awesome." So yeah, I think that's been really positive. Like, I've loved that. But also just like not being an expert, like just being someone who's like really passionate. I think I've been really good at organising and bringing people together. But it certainly hasn't come from any sort of level of expertise. And so like it can be quite daunting when it is like, the climate risk assessment comes out and then people are asking me and it's like, whoa, I probably know as much as you do a little bit here. Like,
seems bad.
It seems, yeah. My take, not good. So yeah, I think, like there's a little bit of that, like they definitely carry that around. But I think overall it's been, like really positive in my life, being able to like have more of those conversations, something I've enjoyed.
I can't speak from a player perspective, but having worked, I guess, in this area for 25 years or so, it's, I guess, not surprising. And what we can see here is, I think, the detail and the granular level of what we know is coming at certain scenarios. I think I still get out of bed. I'm, I guess, generally more of quite a positive person. And so maybe there's a bit of denial in there as well. If you were to put me on a couch and ask me my deepest feelings, I'm sure sometimes you just go, no, don't want to hear about it too much. But I think, the approach, and for people I know, everyone's talking about it, I mean, the people that I've worked with for 20 years, is, yep, this is pretty shit, and what are we going to do about it? And so we quickly move on to solutions and opportunities and put our best foot forward. That was a footy quote then, kind of, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah, you could
Full
be a
credit to
coach
the boys.
next career. Everyone just played their role. Yeah. I think I haven't worked in this space for as long as Lex has, so maybe that's why I'm still up for it. But I think as an athlete, and Tom, you probably can relate to this, and I'm sure you can as well, Lizzie, like, as an athlete, you're always like focusing on the little wins that you can get and the small 1%ers. So I think for me, it's like really just a mindset and to try and turn anything into an opportunity to get better. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of just drilled into you as an athlete. So certainly the approach I take with my work at FrontRunners and I guess with Footy for Climate as well, with this climate risk report, last week or the week before maybe, FrontRunners tried to pull together really quickly this open letter of Sport for 75, which ran alongside the Business for 75 campaign. And whilst like it's been a really tough few weeks, or like I guess really long time of climate news, I think bringing something like that letter together and getting something out to as many athletes as we could, and then seeing these names just roll in, like we had a 48-hour turnaround for this letter. We were hoping to get like 25 athletes and we had 150. So for me, I think knowing that there's athletes out there who want to support your work, who send you a message and say thank you so much for what you're doing, like it's really motivating. And I think in sport as well, we can, you know, you kind of have a bit of fun with these things as well. It's like when we were writing this letter, obviously it started from the Business for 75 campaign, and we were like, well, let's do Sport for 75. And we kind of had this conversation internally with the team about how athletes wouldn't set shit targets for themselves. Like we wouldn't kind of go out and be like, oh, I'm just going to go at like 60% today.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like, oh yeah, my 65% max bench is great.
And so we kind of had these conversations about like, well, we should just be setting the bar as high as possible. And so I think, yeah, for me, I'm really lucky to work at the intersection of sport and climate, because it can in some ways bring a light-heartedness to what is a really challenging issue at times. And I think the whole reason we're all here today is because we know sport brings us together and keeps us going when times are tough.
Amazing. Couldn't have said any better myself. We're going to get to some audience questions in a second. So if you have any questions, start thinking about them. But while we get to, before we pass microphones around, I just wanted to ask each of you, obviously as discussed, none of us are Pat Cummins. Sadly, we don't have massive personal influence, while we have talked obviously a lot about our individual influence. Curious for you guys, quick takeaway, practical things people can do. If people leave tonight, what are some things that they can sort of have in their mind that they can take action as it relates to sort of things related to climate and sport?
Follow Footy for Climate on Instagram.
Plug time. There we go.
Look, I think coming to these events, having these conversations, I think these are the really powerful things that I didn't realise when I first started the work. And the amount of really great people that I've been able to connect with, but also influence to start considering climate and climate action has been really powerful. So the power of words, I think, getting paralysed in too many individual actions that we need to take, and just using that as a starting point is a great way to start.
I echo Tom's point, and there is something about Footy for Climate on there. Instagram followers are really helpful as expressions of interest for Power Forward and for everyone online, because we are building and we are growing, and we'd love your support. I touched on obviously the individual versus the collective action. I mean, there is a balance there, and that's why for us Power Forward is about the solar and batteries on the club, but then that sparks the conversation. And so I think for me, then part of that is, of course, doing the tangible things, the things that we all know, that energy efficiency, renewables, and the things, switching fuel, EVs, whatever it might be. But then also the conversations is the critical thing. And if you don't know how to do that, look up Climate for Change. An awesome organisation, and they've got a toolkit that just says, here to have those conversations, because that is the most powerful thing you can probably do.
And soon you'll be able to get some Climate for Change and Project Planet conversation cards, even, in fact, a little plug to put in there. I was going to say it's interesting, like the individual action tension thing, because one of the some great research I read a while ago around the reason individual actions like cutting meat out of your diet, things like that, are important is because they spark conversation. So basically, if you want to go vegetarian or vegan, you just need to talk about it. You can be the annoying vegetarian and tell everyone that you won't be eating meat, because that is actually what that power is, and everything does kind of come back to that, as much as it is obviously, yes, your individual carbon footprint, but it is actually, again, your kind of ability to exist in a community.
Love it. Well, I guess if we're giving plugs, FrontRunners would love to send you their newsletter, and you can find us at frontrunners.org.au. We're also on Instagram, and we just send out a newsletter, and we work with, like, obviously Footy for Climate, but across all sports as well. And then the other thing that I'd say in relation to sport is, like, we're all involved in sport in some way. If you're at sport watching the footy this weekend, if you're at, whatever it is, just see if you can have a conversation with someone next to you that's there. If you see athletes speaking up about climate and using their platform and their voice, support them, whether that's a comment or saying, well done, whatever it is, get around them. It's really hard for them to do a lot of the time, so any bit of support counts. And the other thing that's not really related to sport, but it's just write to your local MP. They respond to personal calls, personal emails. That is what makes a huge difference. So I'm sure you're all aware of that already, but keep doing it.
A good reminder. Questions? I'll come around to a roving mic.
Thank you. Well, congratulations for your good work and especially your enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is the first rule of selling, and you've got 27 million Australians as putty in your hands, and you've got to manipulate them and come out and tell the truth.
We didn't use that word.
Yeah, just tell the truth. Firstly, tell all kids that the planet is stuffed beyond repair and they've got serious problems, because throughout the 70s, 97% of scientists declared an emergency, announcing that 1990 was the tipping point when the soils, the air and the water will be ruined beyond repair. So what did China do? Okay, right. China bought all the good, the best cropping land in Africa, right? What did we do? We voted. We have been fools. We voted for fools in the two big parties that have. The question, yeah. Okay. Well. Well, I just think keep doing what you're doing, and every decision's political. You can write to every sports club in Australia and get all their members signed up for $20 a month or something. You know, in politics, you've got to kick heads and you've got to get the numbers and have the money. Thank you.
We did say we wanted words of support, so, you know,
Thank you very much.
we got them. Did you have anything you wanted to add? No. I don't know if you want to say something.
Just wondering if you could have an AFL-friendly planet round.
Well, I've always think that needs to be the Suns versus, who did we say? Suns versus Power. That'd be a great start, I reckon. We're working on it, aren't we?
Yeah, and the Giants with their sponsor NG did was it a green energy round? So, you know, it's possible, and I think there's some thinking around it. There's a head of sustainability now. There's actually a second AFL head of sustainability. They've had the position filled for nearly 3 years. So I think things like this are in the pipeline. I think what we've found in our work with them is that it can take time. So, yeah, fingers crossed next year that we have some sort of green round.
Okay. So speaking of some of the small climate wins that you mentioned before, what are some of the changes you've seen in your sporting clubs in terms of sustainability since you first arrived, and also in terms of climate conversations as well?
Do you want me to kick this one off?
Yeah.
I can talk about the Giants a little bit.
Yeah.
I was at the Giants for 9 years, and they're obviously a really small club. And I think a few years ago, I was working there just like on the business side while I was playing, and they didn't give me, I think I had like a community role. I kind of just made it a climate role. I'm not sure whether they liked that or not, but that's what I did. And I think what we were able to do in that time though was massive. And one of the first things we did was just like a really basic education for the staff and the players. Just talking about how climate and sport related, and I think since then we have seen some huge changes internally just in terms of their operations and what they've done. So like putting more solar on the roofs, they changed all the the lights to LED lighting, and they have made sure that they've had some really sustainable practices in their new development as well at the Giants. But I think the proudest moment for me at the Giants was, just recently they had this green energy round game with NG, who's one of their major sponsors. And so I think, where the conversation was not happening at all to then having a green game, I think is just testament to everyone's ability to actually get on board with what we were talking about when it comes to climate and sport. So that's one example, but...
I'm just going to bridge that first, because Nick's obviously at the Saints now. I was up at the Giants talking to the Giants players, the men and the women, about 2 or 3 months ago, and you can tell that Nick's climate shadow is there, because the men players and the women players are all there. They understand it, and there are about 25 of the girls that were all there because of the work that you had done, the conversations that you had had, and the leadership group from the men as well, who can see that this is an issue because they've heard about it at this club, and they're going to be our next, advocates and ambassadors down the track.
And then maybe just to quickly touch on how the climate and sort of sustainability movement has sort of evolved in the AFL over the last maybe 7 or 8 years. There was very limited movement in this space. There's probably resistance from the AFL to step into this space. 10 years ago, Richmond took a leadership position in 2019 by signing the UNFCCC Sport for Climate Action Framework, and that sort of binds them to sort of a global community of sporting organisations taking leadership in this space. They did their own baseline audit and committed to actions. So they released their Environmental Sustainability Action Plan in 2021-22. And, it's industry leading. So, with their leadership, the AFL has also sort of now started to take action. They've got their own head of sustainability. The AFL can be slow moving as an industry, but I think what we're seeing is progress, which is really positive, but we want to see more.
And I should just say quickly, I know that we're all AFL players up here, but there are other sporting codes doing great work as well. Hockey Australia is one of them. Tennis Australia has done some amazing work. And you can actually, if you go onto FrontRunners website, we did a report with the Environmental Defenders Office that looked at what major governing bodies are doing when it comes to climate. So things like heat policy, having a sustainability working group, and you can actually go on, look at all of the sports governing bodies and see where they're at. Lizzie did some great design work for it as well, so it looks really good.
Great stuff, Nicola. My partner Michelle would be here, but she's an NRL supporter, and Jonathan Thurston's was here, she'd be here, but otherwise, well done, guys, absolutely fantastic. Rob Monaco, 21 years in government, sorry for the individual at the front with the Australian government, and all I can say is government does not have the answers and really does look to organisations like yours and others for that inspiration and that leadership, I guess, in this space. And I'll get a question out eventually. I'll draw the analogy. I think, Tom, you mentioned COVID and father of daughters. We've still got the legacy of, mental health conditions from the lockdown period of teenage kids not being able to go to school. My daughters, Dad, those years I missed playing footy, I'll never get those back. That grassroots football at the club, as you all mentioned, it's where everyone gathers. It's where the social engagement happens. Dare I say, it's where the girls like to watch the boys play, and then the boys will watch the girls play. And it is the legacy that we're experiencing now for a lot of mental health conditions is really not necessarily just not going to school, because I did that online. It was those weekends of not being able to play footy. I will shut up now because I didn't get a question out, did I? But you, no, pass it on to the next person. But thank you.
Taking his comment.
So my question's about the role of the community building particularly in regional community clubs, and about the build out of large scale renewable infrastructure, particularly with the RES system that we have going on. We've got the Southwest RES, which is being built, the Central West Orana RES, and the New England RES in New South Wales. I was just wondering, in terms of building that grassroots community support for those kind of massive infrastructure projects, which will create impact for those local communities, but also for everyone else in Australia. Do you guys have a plan around engaging with those community clubs in those areas who will be impacted, and how they can be the catalyst to really create some long-term sustainable support for those projects in those areas?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and I think probably the role that we play. So if we can have 500 clubs with solar and batteries and water management and shading or whatever it might be, depending on the club's need, and they can be in areas where there is large-scale renewables and it is a real challenge, we have the ability to have the conversation, and we have the ability to show and demonstrate that at the small scale, this is a solution that can work. And I think what our role will be, because if we're doing 500 clubs, we'll be doing it in these spaces, is to be really honest about the changeover and work with, I know that there are organisations like in Victoria, we've got the Vic Grids and there's renewable energy developers, and things haven't gone as well as they have, and that community engagement has been really challenging. And I think we can probably learn from the mistakes in the past there and be really honest about the fact that, of course, things are going to change and it's going to be really challenging for people, and bring in people as well that are from that area that can have the conversations and have a place to be heard, turning the temperature down a little bit as well. I was speaking to an old friend of mine last night who's a, sort of a consultant that works in that space, and she's worked with farmers and landholders and, you know, those that have been, you know, really close friends forever, and you are seeing that fracturing. Oh, we're back. And so, yeah, I think we could definitely have a role to play. I'll also point out that just like the broader discussion about climate change in general, or whether athletes should speak up or not, the support for renewable energy in those regions is really strong, and it hasn't really changed over the last 10, 15 years. It has remained strong. Maybe it's a bit soft, but it's not like suddenly there's this big change in opinion, but there is amplified voices and there's a reason for it. And I think we just need to be honest and truthful and bring people from all sides together to make sure that we can do it without affecting communities in negative ways as best we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All of you are so impressive. My question is, you mentioned pressuring MPs, and I'm just wondering, from your recent Canberra advocacy and visit, whether you think taking the angle of the impact of climate on sport, local community support, is the most influential way to influence National Party MPs or Liberal Party MPs?
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting, you know, pressuring MPs, or is it, you know, bringing people together? And we host an event at Victorian Parliament every year. Really privileged to have done it 2 years in a row, and we'll run it again next year, where we bring people from all sides of Victorian politics together, sharing the impacts of climate change on community sport, and this year talking about, you know, the opportunity that Power Forward presents. I've sat down personally with leaders from all major parties, and so, you know, if you asked me 5 years ago if I thought that was possible, I would be absolutely not. But I think when we talk about community impact, you know, the reality of some of these extreme weather events, you know, striking at these communities, speaking to the impact directly on the footy clubs that are in their communities, and, you know, how we can protect those important community resources that are our footy clubs. You know, the elected members, you know, sit up and listen. So what I've found is it's a really positive conversation to have. There are challenges, and, you know, I have spoken to National Party members who talk about certain aspects of, like, you know, transmission being an issue that they don't want to particularly touch. I think that's fair to say. Like, we'd understand that that's a public position. But when we're talking about some of these local energy solutions that we're talking about, we're able to have a very productive conversation. So I think what was powerful about what we've been able to do is to sort of bring everyone together with a shared passion for our game, highlighting the impact that climate change is undoubtedly having on our communities, and you know, really use the platform of our community footy clubs as a way to, you know, create bipartisanship and support for, you know, community action.
At the Power Forward launch in Mansfield about a month ago, the local member for Eildon, Cindy McLeish, came along, and so she's a Liberal Party member and was coming to support the community because she's a big part of that community. And we had a great chat and spoke about, you know, the things that they can be doing or the things that they can support. So I think, I mean, the basic answer to your question is yes, absolutely we can. You know, there's a spectrum. It's not as binary as we think it is when it comes to climate action or, you know, otherwise. And I think regardless of whether you're in a, you know, Labor, Liberal, whatever it is, seat, the best thing you can do is to, as Nick and Lizzie said, just speak to your, you know, call your MP. And call is, you know, I want to have a chat, and this is why it's important to me, because of sport. They will listen. They will definitely listen to that. And it's not a matter of left or right. We've seen some of the most amazing pro-renewables projects happen in New South Wales over the last 10 years with, you know, Matthew Keane. So it doesn't matter. We're totally apolitical, but we will push all parties, whoever they are, for more climate action.
Oh, yes. I wonder if I could ask you, the actual climate impact on individual sports people hasn't been mentioned, and I'm wondering about tennis players. particularly the ones that play in the Australian Open. Are there many tennis players coming on board, or because it's such an individual sport, it's a little bit different because they don't get support? And how will the next few summers play out for those tennis players?
Yeah, great question. And we've seen, I think there's been a fair bit of media around, particularly the Australian Open, on the heat impacts on not just players but fans, volunteers. It's actually been really dangerous, and every year there's a new record broken at the Australian Open, right? Which is terrible. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if FrontRunners has worked directly with many tennis players. I think we had a few sign the cool down, which was that initial campaign with over 460 athletes. It is one of the sports we haven't been able to get as many athletes involved, and I think you're right, it's probably because it's quite an individual sport. Whenever we do campaigns, we often have the most players from AFL or football, and when I say football, I mean soccer in this context, because they're a team sport, so they're probably all talking to one another. But we'd love to have more. If anyone knows any tennis players, we'd love to chat to them. But yeah, I think that in terms of the heat impacts on them, it can be really dangerous. I'm pretty sure recently there was a player, and I can't remember who it was. What was the most recent tennis tournament that happened? US Open. And the player stopped and I think gave water to a fan who was suffering from heat exhaustion, which is just wild, right? And I think I can probably speak to my own experience as a player when I know I've had to play in 36 degrees at Blacktown, which we did have to do that. I was really anxious during the week, and I was probably more anxious because I'm working in this space. But as athletes, I didn't know who was responsible for the heat policy, who was going to make the call, what kind of things were going to be in place to protect me as a player. And if I'm worried about that, I can only imagine what younger athletes or younger kids playing sport or parents of kids who are going out to play in extreme conditions are thinking. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's definitely something that crosses our mind.
There's also, stories. Amy Steele, Australian elite netballer, from it was quite a few years ago now, but had her career ended due to the heat injury. And recently, a NRL player ended up sort of having an injury from. They did a training session where they denied them water in extreme heat conditions, and he ended up having long-term impacts and having to retire. So there are stories around, some of these. Heat-related injuries, and not in sports that we necessarily consider being summer sports. So, NRL pre-season training, it's in summer, the same as AFL. And so, we are actually experiencing, the extreme heat of summer.
Yeah, and I think it would be remiss of me also not to mention that there was a local grassroots cricketer community player in Adelaide who recently tragically passed away playing cricket in Adelaide in the summer. So it's obviously not just elite players. That's what is publicised, but community grassroots are feeling the impacts, and that was a terrible tragedy, and it was extreme heat that is what was the cause of that.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to end questions there, which is quite a depressing way to wrap up. But I think a real reminder of, what we're up against and why it's so important that we, use our own power and influence in all the world. Ways that we can. Could I get everyone to give a big round of applause to our panelists for tonight? And I will hand back to Lada Prince.
Thank you. I'm designated to give a thank you to our lovely panel, but all the questions have thanked you already. It's fantastic. But genuinely, your work is incredible. It's inspiring to hear about it this evening, and we couldn't appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules anymore to come and speak to us on a Wednesday evening. These are very busy people, as we've just heard. So thank you guys so much for taking part this evening, and I've strategically stashed a couple of little thank you gifts down the back here for all of you, right where I can gracefully reach them out. But no, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. It's appreciated. Oh, teamwork makes the dream work, hey? Lovely. So, thank you. It's really appreciated. I don't think we've ever had such star power on a panel before. It's excellent. And I love the chat about practical actions and the power of advocacy, because I've got a couple of those coming up for you, hopefully on a slide momentarily. Yes. Here we go. So I reckon many of us in this room were advocating to our decision makers last year, or advocating to our community at council election time. Good work, guys. We have a cracking new council. The old council was good too. We regret your departure, Susan. But the new council is doing amazing things in climate action and also in supporting our urban trees. You may or may not be aware that they're currently developing a new tree protection overlay strategy, and it's in community consultation process at the moment. If you scan the QR code on this little printed agenda you found on your seat, you can read all about the tree protection strategy they're proposing, and you can also fill out a survey to tell them why you think trees are important and what we should be doing to protect not only our significant individual trees, but also our tree overlay more generally. So that's a little local action that you can take if you're in Boroondara. If you're in Kooyong, you might also be interested in our next event. Yeah, so here's another one where advocacy has been powerful. We've got a lovely climate-friendly Kooyong MP, Dr. Monique Ryan, and we're pleased to be hosting her in November in conversation with Tristan Edis, who you might have come across in relation to green energy markets or also writing for Renew Economy. So this is going to be a really interesting discussion evening, not dissimilar to tonight, talking about climate opportunities and roadblocks in the 48th Parliament. So book your seat. We're headed down to the Malvern Town Hall for this one, and it should be a really interesting discussion. And I think that's going to be our last public talk for the year. But if you would like to see another fantastic public talk, you'll find event for the Menzies citizens among us on your seat, the environment and human health coming up. What's the date on that one? 9th of October. Lovely. So get along to those two events. Scan the QR code to RSVP to Monique and Tristan. And then last of all, we don't have a QR code for this one, but more generally speaking, we've seen this evening that there's more to be done than just attending events, particularly in the light of significant climate news like the Northwest Shelf Extension, the Climate Risk Report, and possible climate target announcements tomorrow. It's time to step up and get involved. I think we've all been inspired this evening to take a few steps there. We are doing lots more than just organising hopefully interesting and fun public evenings. We are hitting the streets, we're talking to the decision makers, we're taking action on all sorts of fronts, and if you would like to be involved as a volunteer, we would love to have you. So there is a QR code here for our general volunteering page. We'd love to hear your suggestions, we'd love to have you on board. Please come along. And I think that's all that we have for next steps today. We are going to hear from our beautiful, I was going to say our beautiful fellow climate advocacy organisation in Boroondara, Electrify Boroondara. But before we go, I will just remind everyone that we're a fully volunteer-run organisation. There's a donation bucket at the door, and Richard can also take card, I believe. So anything is incredibly appreciated. But Chloe's going to tell you about next month's big event here in Boroondara.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm Chloe from Electrify Boroondara. First of all, is there anyone in the audience who doesn't actually know us? Because I know this, it's likely that you all know us, yes. So I might be speaking to the four of you and explaining that we are also a grassroots organisation, 100% volunteer run, and we're also all about helping people take climate action. But rather than where you're perhaps more focused on the sports club level, where people can take that action, we're working at the household level. And we have in 4 weeks' time, October, let's get it right, Sunday, the 12th of October, we're having our signature event, which is the Electrify Your Life Expo. And we have designed it so that it is something that families can come to, people who are living in apartments can come to and get something out of it, or whether you're owning your house or you're a renter, you can still get some value out of coming to our expo. Though I have to say, it's really, really inspiring seeing you people as young people. You're very young compared to me. Because we have found in general that it is much harder to reach a younger audience because most of them can't afford to own a home, and although they can do things when they're apartment dwellers, or many of them living at home still with their parents, it is much harder for them to take action. So what you're doing is just fantastic, and using that sport as the way to bring people together. So at the Electrify Your Life Expo, you can come and speak to experts and service providers to get all your questions answered about how you can electrify your home. And this year we have the City of Boroondara Council who are actually partnering with us, which is just fantastic, and they're offering 6 different topics where they're inviting experts to come in and talk run some information sessions where, again, you'll have plenty of chance to ask questions. We're also really making an effort to make this a family-friendly event, so that there'll be some good fun interactive activities like building an electric city and, electrify your kids if you like, yes. Or get them to electrify their own smoothie. Go and buy an electric sausage, or one that's at least powered by an electric vehicle. So that's the kind of fun activities that will be there. And it's free. It's at Hawthorn Arts Centre. And if you register by this Friday, you will go in the draw for the possibility of winning a weekend test drive with an electric combi van. Well, it's not quite a combi van, but it's the new modern version. So it's a VW. It's actually called, and I can't see without my glasses. I wish I could just use my little phone and still see what I'm reading. It's the ID Buzz. So that's a pretty good prize, we reckon. And there's lots of other prizes. In fact, the council has also just put forward some free home energy assessments, which is huge. So what we really want is for you to be able to walk away from this event knowing exactly what step you're going to take. And if one of those steps is you're going to get a home energy guide to come in and help you with your journey, then that's awesome. Because we know that by making these changes, you can reduce your energy bills, improve your health and comfort, and of course, reduce your climate emissions. So hope to see you there. Thank you.